Everyone. In the previous video, I started discussing that concept demand, and I made a differentiation between demand and quantity demand. So when price changes, I say only quantity demand changes. When other factors except price changes, then the demand changes itself. So in this video, I shall discuss all these determinants of demand and their effect on demand. The first one is the price. This is the most important determinant of demand. The only difference between price and other factors that when price changes, quantity demand changes. When other factors changes, demand changes itself. So if I consider this example, we can see that price change increases from P0 to P1, and that leads to a decrease in the quantity demand, and that change can be observed from here to here. This means these changes is occurring along the same demand curve, which we call movement along the demand curve. However, when other factors changes, factors like income, prices of related goods, taste and preference, expectation about future price, or number of consumer and population, any of these factor changes of any of this factor leads to a shift in the demand curve. Now let's consider income. Ceteris paribus, when people's income changes, demand change. I'm sure you remember what ceteris paribus is. This means keeping all other factors constant. And that actually depends that changes in income, whether it will increase demand or decrease demand, that depends on the type of the goods. If the good is a normal good, then increase in income should lead to more demand. If the good is inferior good, then any increase in income should decrease the demand for that good. So what are the examples of normal goods? Any good whose demand increases with an increase in income. And this is a very relative concept. For some, rice might be a normal good. For others, this might be an inferior good. So if your income increases and you're still consuming more and more rices, then rice is a normal good. For others, if their income increases and they purchase or consume less of rice, then for them the same product can be an inferior good. So this is a very relative concept. It always depends on people's preference and choices. Now let's move to the next slide. So when you are considering normal goods, any increase in income should lead to more demand. This can be seen in this left diagram, where demand D shifts to its right to D prime. So when there is any increase in demand, demand curve shifts to its right. On the other hand, when there is an decrease in demand due to a decrease in income, you can see that demand curve is shifting from right D1 to D2. So there is an inward or leftward shift. So leftward or inward shift leads to decrease in demand. For inferior goods, as I said earlier, lower income should lead to higher demand. So just like the previous graph, you can expect the demand is increasing, or D is shifts to its right to D prime. And in this graph, in the right hand graph, you can see right side graph, you can see higher income leads to a decrease in demand. So demand curve shifts to its left, D1 to D1. So when it comes to inferior goods, you can expect the opposite. Lower income leads to higher demand, higher income leads to lower demand. Now let's discuss about the prices of related goods. So when there is any changes in the prices of the related goods, that might either increase or decrease the demand. Again, these changes in demand is associated with the type of the good we are discussing. If the two goods are substitute goods, then if any increase in price of one good might lead should lead to an increase in the should lead to demand for the other good. So what are the examples of substitute goods? Uh, Again, it's a very relative concept. You can consider Coke and Pepsi as substitute, but for some, they never consume Pepsi at all. So in that case, these are not related goods at all. So when you are comparing two goods, it has to be related goods. Usually in textbook, you might find tea and coffee as an example of substitute goods, beef and chicken and pork and so on. So again, this is a very relative concept. So whichever, if you find that if an increase of one good causes an increase of the demand for the other good, you can consider both good as substitute in nature. On the contrary, complementary goods are those goods which leads to an increase in price of one good uh, causes a decrease in the demand for other goods. So say for example, if you look at the textbook example, you might see that sugar and tea, coffee and cream are sort of thing. But again, it's a very relative thing. You might prefer black coffee. In that case, creamer and coffee doesn't show that complementary relationship. But in general, whichever shows that condition, like if any increase in price of one good causes a decrease in the demand for other good, should be considered as a complementary good. Some goods shows strong complementarity, some goods shows relatively weaker complementarity. So, say for example, SIM card and the handset, this shows a very strong complementarity. Your left foot shoe and the right foot shoe is a very strong example. It's a good example of complementary goods. Same goes for your glasses, like lens and frame. These are good complementary goods. So if you look at the graph uh, for substitute goods, you can see when the price of good one, now if you consider two goods, good one and good two, and if the price of good one increases, law of demand states the quantity demand for that good should decrease. However, if these two goods are substitute in nature, then a decrease in the demand for quantity demand for good one should increase the demand for good two. So if you just ignore the middle term, then you can see the increase in price of good one leads to the demand for good two to increase, and that is the thing we have depicted in this picture. So this is basically for the good demand for good two, and this is true for you know when price goes down for good one as well. So in that case, demand for good two should decrease as well. Now let's have a look on the complementary goods. So when price of good one increases, just like the previous example, if there are two goods, good one and good two, and P1 refers to the price of good one, if that increases, law of demand states the quantity demand for good one should decrease. However, since they are complementary in nature, so if you demand less of good one, you should buy less of good two as well. So demand for good two should decrease. So if you overlook the middle term, then increase in P1 leads to a decrease in D2. That means when the price of good 1 increases, demand for good 2 decreases. So in this picture, what we are showing is demand for good 2. So increase in P1 leads to a decrease in good 2, a decrease for demand in good 2. For opposite case, if the price of good 1 decreases, that should lead to an increase in the demand for good 2. Now let's talk about the preference, test and preference. Test and preference both plays a massive role determining the demand. If the test is favorable, if there is any change, a favorable change in test, that will lead to a higher demand. If the test and preference change is unfavorable, that will lead to a lower demand. So why we're focusing on test and preference? Because if you find something interesting, if you wish to prefer more of that good, naturally will buy or demand more of that good. So that is what we are talking about, the favorable change in taste. Unfavorable change in taste means you are not preferring that good much, and that's why you are demanding it less. Future expectations about prices and market condition. So in future, if you expect the prices of a good might decrease or increase, that might also change your consumption behavior. So for example, if you expect the prices of computers to fall, then you may put off buying one until later. So if the expectation about future prices is positive, then your demand will be higher. Or if your expectation, future expectation is negative, which means that price might increase in future, decrease in future, in that case you can expect lower demand in the current period and you might buy it later on. Final factor, which is the number of consumer or population. A different textbook mentioned it differently, so I combine both of these factors in one. So demand curve shifts due to changes in population or number of consumers. If the increase in population or number of consumers, then naturally they will demand more. So demand curve will shift to its right. On the contrary, if there is any decrease in population or any decrease in number of consumer, that will lead to a lower demand, which means demand curve will shift to its left. So thank you.